Hello, Faith Family, and thank you for joining us for the Daily Connection. It's a time when we get together in the Word, and more importantly, the Word gets into us. So we're about midway through our work week. I pray things are going well for you, and that you're doing exactly what our topic was focusing on, is living out the message. And today we're looking at the divine imperative that goes with the idea of living it out. It comes to us in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. So imagine that. Another 3:16 going along with John 3:16, 2 Timothy 3:16. It's amazing how that 3:16 number shows up so often to be very important. Well, here we're in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, where he says, "This is how we have come to know love. He laid down his life for us. We should also lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." Now, the word know there is an interesting word because it's a word that speaks of experiential knowledge, not just, the awareness of facts or figures. It's saying, hey, I was there. Hey, I've experienced this. It's going to be like me saying, hey, I know of Mickey Mantle, but somebody who actually played with him would say, hey, I know Mickey Mantle. So in one sense, we know facts about someone, certain figures, statistics. In the other case, we know them personally. We know some of their idiosyncrasies. We know their personality. And so John's saying, first of all, we know. We've come to know love by this, in this manner. And of course, he's saying, hey, we watched Jesus, the perfect example of love. We stood beside him all throughout his ministry to demonstrate that love. But I think he can also come back to this. When he says this, he laid down his life for us. We should also lay down our life. In that sense, John is saying, hey, we experienced the perfect example of love, not just in the life that he lived, but also in the death that he surrendered himself to. Laid down is implying the idea of one surrendering out of one's own will. And so, it makes me think back to what we see in John's Gospel, chapter 15. I know we talked a little bit about that Monday, but it really bears repeating because to me, a lot of the foundation of what John is now putting before us was laid by what Jesus said in the upper room. So in John 15, starting in verse 12, and I'd encourage you to go back and look at these later, Jesus says, "This is my command, love one another as I have loved you." And so in the command that Jesus gave, he said, hey, the standard that you're to apply is not the standard of the world, because the standard of the world is typically a love based on what you can do for me. I'll love you as long as you have something you can give back to me. Almost like an exchange situation, a give and take. But Jesus says, hey, you need to love like I've loved. And the love that I've shown you, he said in verse 13, there's no greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. And so for Jesus, love, the epitome of love, was demonstrated in genuine sacrifice. Which takes us back to our text we were just looking at a moment ago in 1 John chapter 1 John 3, verse 16. This idea of laying down our lives. Now, truly, in terms of the example of Jesus, we know that takes us to the cross and him sacrificing his perfect sinless life for the sin of man for all time. And so in one sense, it may be that at a certain point, that may be the case. But most scholars would agree that the implication of that statement is that we would sacrifice self in terms of gratifying my own desires, even meeting my own needs for the greater good of the other. To be able to supply the needs of my brother or my sister, because the statement is qualified, lay down our life for brothers and sisters. So he's talking specifically about members of the faith family, the body of Christ here. I think that's important to remember here. But the whole idea is this. True love, as demonstrated by Jesus, and of course another text we could look at was where Jesus would say, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Obedience to the will of God would obviously be the demonstration. But in this particular instance, we're talking about sacrifice. And so the idea is this, John is saying, and we know that because verse 17 is going to qualify it. If anybody has the world's goods, Brother Aaron will talk us through that tomorrow, walk us through that tomorrow. But just suffice it to say that when it comes to how we live out the message, one of the main imperatives of that would be love, demonstrated through sacrifices that we make in order to meet the needs of others, and especially those of the body of Christ. That may be, and of course, the question comes from our author, and I like this because it makes practical application. He says, what are practical ways we can lay down our lives for others? And so I want you to think about that for a moment. If you're watching this in the morning, you're getting ready to go to work, you're getting ready to go to school. Of course, kids are almost done with that. I know you guys are celebrating that. Most of our college kids are done. But if you're getting ready to go and interact with a group of people, wherever that location may be, maybe begin thinking now, hey, how can I lay down my life for members of this group or a certain member of this group? Or, hey, how can I lay down my life for a member that's in my Connect group that's really struggling? What's the greatest need they have right now? And it may be laying down time, meaning that you sacrifice time that you would have committed to doing something you wanted to do to instead go and listen. Just be a listening ear, be a sympathetic ear, be compassionate and caring. It may be that you sacrifice time to go and help them with a project. I know, for instance, Brother Randy has been very diligent in our community, and we've got several projects lined up. So now we're just needing the hands and the feet, and so in some cases, those are members of our church too. We're trying to meet the needs for them to provide manpower, physical labor, and then they pay for the supplies. So there's all kind of ways you can go about that. So I want to challenge you right now just to take a few moments. If it's in the morning, if it's in the evening, think what you can do tomorrow on Thursday. But either way, consider what are some practical ways, or what's a practical way that you can lay down your life to help meet the needs of others, and more importantly, to demonstrate the love of Christ, confirming that the gospel is indeed the good news of what Christ has done in you and what he's now doing through you. Well, as always, I want to encourage you to live sent.